Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight and making this a part of your Monday. And I'm Tim Steffensmeyer. I have the pleasure of serving as Assistant Vice President of Engagement here at Kansas State University. Many of you know, but maybe you came from a different path into this room, but we are celebrating and putting a spotlight on all things engagement. It's Extension Engagement Week at Kansas State University. And this lecture series is a piece of how we're kicking that off. So for those of you connected to that week, welcome. Look forward to interacting with you throughout the week. For those of you who are here for this lecture for a different avenue, I hope to underline that one of the things we're trying to do is figure out all the ways we possibly can to extend this university, to collaborate in mutually reciprocal ways with communities and businesses and individuals, specifically here in Kansas. And we know that if we do it right here in Kansas, our impact will go well beyond the state borders. So that's the week. So that's the big frame. It's Extension and Engagement Week. And particularly for those of you who work in or are part of our extension system, welcome to tonight. So that's kind of the big tent. If you go one step kind of below that, we're here for the Lou Douglas Lecture. And that's pretty special too. So this university has a long-standing tradition of recognizing and bringing in high caliber, nationally known speakers to talk about the ways that we're trying to make change and to try to make our communities the kinds of places that everybody can prosper, that everyone can have access to not only higher ed, but this larger place where we get to learn, maybe deliberate, maybe realize that we have a lot of different viewpoints on issues, and that's in part what the Lou Douglas Lecture has represented here at Kansas State University for a long time. There's a nice description of all things Lou Douglas in this program, and for people my age or older, I hope you have your readers, because it has small font, and so I think it says a bunch of the things that I'm going to say, but I'll just say a couple, okay, knowing that most of you can read. So it's based on a philosophy. The Lou Douglas Lecture is based and committed on this notion of building community and having vibrant political discourse. And the group that's connected to that, the group that's hosting us tonight is UFM. UFM also has a long history in this community, Manhattan, across this state, and connections to Kansas State University. UFM is all about creating educational enrichment programs at Kansas State University, the Manhattan area. It has like a 55-year track record. And here too, you know, some of those same words I used when I opened up what we're trying to do as a university around access for all, that's really at the heart of what UFM's all about, is how can we make educational experiences open for everybody? How can we allow a lot of people to be teachers and learners at the same time? And that mission carries on today, okay? So it's Extension Engagement Week. UFM is our host, and just for 1 second, I'd like to say a thank you and recognition to the UFM board, their staff, their director, Dr. Elia Metrovich C. I think you're in the back, hello. So just one round of applause for the people that put all this together. The other really neat thing about UFM is they've partnered with our extension system. So I was talking about there are a lot of folks in this room that are connected to the extension system. They've partnered with our extension system in the past, and they're going to be partnering with the university and the system moving forward in really significant ways. So it's really appropriate that this is both the Lou Douglas Lecture and UFM here happening this week on Extension and Engagement Week. So the week's extension engagement, the organization that's hosting us is UFM. The lecture is Lou Douglas, which has this long history, 45 years. The other thing about this lecture, it's always been free of charge. It's always been thought-provoking, really distinguished speakers, and I'm going to introduce here in a second our speaker that fits both of those boxes. And it's really a way to, I said this purpose of this week is to extend the university. And the Lou Douglas Lecture Series has always been an opportunity to extend policies that do what? Democratize, okay? And democratizing, yeah, right? I'll give that a big hand. So That's a big word. That's that's a fancy word. I like to use that word. But the word is actually a pretty simple word, and it means, how diverse people share power. So it's the people's power. That's what democracies are there for. We're in the longest running democracy experiment right now, and it's fundamentally about figuring out how people who are quite different could come together, live in community, and share power. And that's what this lecture series has tried to extend over and over again for all these years. And here we are playing a little part in that democracy experiment role. Okay? So I think in our small way, that's what we're doing tonight. And I'm confident that that's what our speaker is going to help us think about. Okay? So, I keep repeating this, Extension Engagement Week. UFM is hosting us. We're at the Lou Douglas Lecture, and now the speaker, and then I'll get out of your way. I have a real pleasure of getting to introduce Dr. Kaye Morgan. And there too, if you have the capacity to read a lot of great stuff, you can read her bio on the inside here, and it's impressive. But I want to pull a couple things out of that and say a few personal notes. So Kaye currently is president and CEO of the Kansas Leadership Center. I'll refer to that as KLC for the rest of this introduction. She's also a third-generation Kansan. I love the fact that she's got a bachelor's degree in chemistry, a master's in public administration, and a doctorate in educational leadership. Pretty eclectic. I think it has equipped her to do the work she's doing, where she's trying to work across a lot of factions, a lot of people who think differently about the challenges, who might have different values, who might feel like they're going to lose some different things if we work together, and who are loyal to different things. And I think somebody who's both a chemist and a public administrator and somebody who knows a bit about education theory is probably equipped to talk tonight and equipped to be the president and CEO of KLC. The other thing that I must say is she has 30 years of experience in higher ed. And some of you may have met Kaye or known Kaye when she was all in shocker gear, and a lot of it. And that's when I met her. So she has worked and done so much good work for Wichita State University, another Board of Regents university, just like K-State, somebody we partner with, and we will be partnering with more and more in the future. And Kaye did all kinds of roles there that you can read in the bio, and ended up working both in the provost office, the president's office, leading some of the same things I was talking about when I opened today: engagement, economic development, strategic planning, in a really great way. The last thing I want to say about Kaye is that KLC has a lot of overlap with Lou Douglas and UFM in terms of it's a mission-oriented, driven organization. It's committed to fostering leadership for stronger, healthier, and more prosperous communities in Kansas and well beyond the United States and across the world. And Kaye's doing everything in her power, my experience of her, to mobilize a bunch of people, including all of us in this room, to exercise a little bit more leadership in maybe a little bit bolder way around the big things that most of us would rather look away from. Last two things. On a personal note, Kaye's been an inspiration to me. I got to know her the most when we started to teach together in one of KLC's programs. And at that time, she was a really busy administrator for Wichita State. So she would fly into these programs and she would give this 1-hour lecture, and super dynamic, you'll see here in a second. And one of the things that she would talk about is one of the KLC principles is leadership is, for anybody, anywhere, anytime. That's one of the principles. I like that. It's kind of like democracy. And what I learned from Kaye is that that looks a lot different depending on who you are and where you come from and the people maybe you're loyal to, and the context that you have in relationship to that problem, and maybe the skin you're in. And so, yeah, maybe leadership is accessible to anybody, anytime, any place, and it's nuanced, and it depends. And we ought to work really hard to make as many people comfortable with as lowest amount of risk as possible to exercise leadership. So I love that about Kaye. And then last thing, and in full disclosure now, I sort of report to Kaye, so this part of the introduction is really important. As CEO, she's also responsible for this really cool partnership with Kansas State University called Third Floor Research. And my colleague, Kahan Shams, is in the audience right now, who does a lot of research for that. And what that is it's this opportunity for this nonprofit and this public university to collaborate to do what? To make some sense of like what happens when a bunch of us go out in the world with a few leadership ideas and try to make an impact. And what I like most about this last piece of this relationship I've had with Kaye is she's interested in impact at all levels. And so as she's coming up to speak tonight, my hunch is you're going to hear a little bit about how all of us can make impact at various different levels, at the individual level, maybe around our dinner table, maybe in our organizations, maybe on the really big challenges, and ultimately, hopefully, at a systemic level. So it's my pleasure, distinct pleasure tonight, to kick off this Lou Douglas lecture by inviting Dr. Kaye Morgan to the stage to give the speech tonight.
Good evening. Oh, it's Monday night and you're missing football in order to be here, so a little bit more energy might be helpful. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to start with a moment of transparency. I turned 54 this year. I know there's some, I know, right? Full grown. And I decided at 54 that I no longer wanted to wear eyeglasses. Right? And I've worn eyeglasses since middle school. Anybody understand where I'm going? I bought some really cool glasses, but they were leaving marks on my nose. And when you start to wrinkle marks on your nose, for those of you that are traditional undergraduate students, just believe me, it'll happen to you too. You get a little more vain about the marks that are on your nose. And so I went to my optometrist, and she prescribed for me contact lenses. Any of you wear contact lenses? Yeah, okay, so I started wearing contact lenses at 54. Yep, that's appropriate. And I got them, and I have bifocals. Some of you know what the lived experience of bifocals are. If you don't yet know, just as my grandma would say, just keep living, baby, just keep living. I got bifocals, and then what I learned is that when you have bifocals, Tim, it's really hard to have contacts in your eyes because that whole look above the line, below the line thing doesn't really work. So after 2 or 3 exchanges back and forth with my optometrist, she decided we were going to do an experiment where I was only going to wear one. So I have a monocle, which by the end of the day makes my eye one eye is energized and the other eye is a little tired. So if I start to squint, I'm not squinting at you, it's my monocle. All right? And so as Tim noted, I am not going to read any of the font in any of the documents because my monocle, it's 7:30 and my monocle expires around 6:15. I am excited to be here. As a lifelong shocker, it's always good to be in Wildcat Country. And so excited to be with you all on Extension and Engagement Week. Excited about the mission of the organizations that are coming together to sponsor the activities for this week, and even more excited about what it is we might be able to attain together. I've got 2 mics here. Should I just, yeah, okay. 2 mics, 1 eye. Something magical there, So I get excited about the opportunity. For one, I don't take for granted that people invite me anywhere to say anything. Because not everyone gets an invitation to be in community with folks, especially the people who are dear to the organization, to the institution, to the work of Kansas State University. And so I'm grateful to Dr. Alaya, who, yes, thanks so much for the invitation. She and I have had she's tracked me all over the country in order to make sure I had the information that I needed to have. Thank you so much for the invitation, and they took me to dinner before tonight, you all. It was beautiful. So I love the hospitality, and I'm grateful for that. To the board and the staff who have worked tirelessly. These types of things don't happen, but just accidentally. There are a lot of people who are working and printing and making copies and gathering information and putting up signs and doing all the things in order to get us all in the same space at the same time with the expectation that something good is going to happen. And so I want to acknowledge those folks. My dear friend, Dr. Tim, who taught me about the KLC framework. What he didn't say is I was this faculty member who would run in, I would join the team of which he was the faculty chair. I was only responsible for an hour of that, but when I sat in the room, I literally sat in awe then, and I continue to sit in awe now of the generosity of spirit as you pour into and accept learning and education from other people, and I count myself amongst those, so thank you. KLC has a rich history of supporting Kansas State University's extension program. And so I know that there are folks who are in this room or online or enjoying the experience, I hope enjoying, underline caps, enjoying, this experience via live stream, who are familiar with KLC. And so while I am 2 hours and 15 minutes away from home, give or take, it feels very comfortable to be in a space with folks who do the work that you all do. As Tim noted, I come from a background in extension and in service. I come from a higher ed organization where I'm not necessarily connected to what happens in the classroom, but oftentimes I am the first and only exposure that a person in community might have with the institution. And so in that case, I am Wichita State. And so what I know for sure, in many cases in the communities in which you all labor, you are Kansas State University. They may not ever make it to the campus, but they have a little bit of Wildcat Nation with you. And so I want to acknowledge what it is that you all do. And then my last quick shout out before I get started is to Jake and Dawson. I know Jake is here. I don't know if Dawson made it tonight. Is Dawson in the room? No, he had class. Jake and Dawson, if you don't know, are the arbiters of the Little Apple Local podcast. I've gotten a chance to do several different podcasts in the last year, none of them as fun as hanging out with Dawson and Jake. And so whether or not you listen to my episode makes no sense to me. But once you get in there, you will find that there are several episodes of the Little Apple Locals podcast that you ought to be paying attention to. I've learned quite a bit about what's happening in Manhattan, and I would encourage you to do that as well. So shout out to my new friends, Jake and Dawson. Lou Douglas. When I'm invited to do these types of things under the auspices of a name, it causes me to pause and to learn a little bit about the person with who I share this experience. And so as Tim elevated and acknowledged, there is language about Lou Douglas. Some of you probably are familiar with him. I was not, but I've come to learn that he was motivated by grassroots organizations and individuals to pursue social justice, economics, and foreign policy. Social justice, economics, and foreign policy. And it said in the things that I was able to surface about him that he was skilled at working across difference, as Tim noted, for the purpose of strengthening democracy. So I didn't have an opportunity to engage with Dr. Douglas, but he seems like my kind of guy. The kind of guy that I'd want to spend some time with, have a beverage of some sort, and learn from. When we're reflecting on the current state of Kansas, I openly desire more people like Dr. Douglas. More people who are actively engaged in the pursuit of community that most desire. More people who are desirous to work with people on any side of an issue. More people who understand that the complex challenges in our state, our country, and our world require curiosity, courage, and dare I say, compassion. I'm actually hoping that you are some of those people. Yeah? Okay, good. Because I was like, if you're not those people and you work in this work, tomorrow might be really hard for you because there are going to be some courageous people who are going to show up. I'm guessing there are going to be some curious people who are going to show up. And my prayer is that there will be some compassionate people who will show up. So in preparation for some time with you, I spent the information. Elias sent me lots of information about K-State Extension and the 5 critical issues that you all are facing. She sent me the university strategic plan, and so I had an opportunity to print and thumb through that. And there's some named opportunities that your university administration is elevating, ways that you all are engaging in the state and your communities. And of course, a link to the UFM website. And while I was digging around in all the materials that she provided, I came across a podcast that your alumni association does, where my good friend and partner in all things pleasant and sometimes designated as crime, Dr. Mary Toller, was interviewed by the Alumni Association. You all know Mary Toller? If you don't, you should get to know her. There's some Staley School friends that are here in the audience tonight. I appreciate your presence. So I ran across this podcast that featured Mary of the Staley School of Leadership Studies, and I listened to it. It's only about 19 minutes, but it was really powerful for me. And so I know that there are some students in the room, so I'm going to share a little bit about what Mary said, because I thought it was apropos for our time tonight. Mary told of an experience that she had early in her K-State experience, where a beloved professor asked her 4 questions. And she noted that the 4 questions that were asked during her undergraduate degree here at this august institution are 4 questions that come to mind for her on a fairly regular basis. And while they guided her through her undergraduate experience, they guided her through graduate school, they even yet guide her as an adult and a professional and a scholar. And the questions that her professor asked were pretty simple on their face. Mary said that her professor asked her to answer these simple but powerful questions. And the question series starts with, who am I? Who am I? What do I care about most? What type of contribution do I want to make in the world? And what is it going to take to get there? And I just thought, those are 4 pivotal questions. And depending on the point of life in which you sit, your status, your situation, the answers to those questions probably shift a little bit. Who am I? What do I care about most? What contribution do I want to make to the world? And what's it going to take to get there? When I think about who am I, and I thought about a little bit what my answers would have been when I was 21 as an undergrad. And as Tim noted, I was a chemistry major. I wanted to be a patent attorney. So can you imagine the answers that I would have come up with at 21? Who am I? One of the things that I've learned, a part of my identity that has become more important to me, and Tim alluded to this fact, is the fact that I'm a 3rd-generation Kansan. And I never really thought about that till I was in a situation with a group of folks, most of whom did not look like, actually, in fact, none of them looked like me. Gender-wise, yes. With regard to race and ethnicity, no. And everybody was talking about, I'm a 5th-generation Kansan, I'm a 6th-generation Kansan. Someone said I'm a 6th-generation graduate of this institution. And I thought, wow, what would it have taken for me to be a multi-generation anything? I don't get to be a sixth-generation college graduate. I'm a first-generation college graduate, a proud first-generation college graduate, but a first-generation college graduate. So I got to thinking, what does it mean for me to be a third-generation Kansan? I come from a lineage where my grandfather, when, my family says stuff like, where are your people from? Any of you have family members like that? Where are your people from? Where are your people from and where they go to church? Those are really important questions in my community. If you don't have good answers to that, you don't get a turkey leg. You get mashed potatoes and you sit at the other end. You're invited in, but you don't get the same meal as everybody else. Where are your people from and what church do you go to? My grandfather hails from Louisiana. Northern Louisiana. My grandfather ended up coming to the state of Kansas because his brother got into a fight with a shopkeeper in 1937. And my grandfather's mother told him to run. And when he ran, my grandfather had to accompany him. So literally, my grandfather came to Kansas running from the Klan. But I'm a third-generation Kansan. Who am I? Who am I is a combination of my background, my experiences, my identity, and my context. When I was 19, who I thought I was so smart at 19. Any of the rest of you, in your 20s, you were just absolutely brilliant. And then the number of brain cells that you have, I don't know about you, mine just diminished over time. I'm not nearly as smart now as the things that I thought I knew for sure, now I have questions about, I'm like, I don't know. We just gonna wake up tomorrow and see. I'm not sure. This idea of knowing who you are and from where you come helps identify a little bit of purpose. So when we're talking about impact, I think Mary's professor asked her a very provocative question. Who are you? At 19, I was a different woman than I am at 54. I wasn't yet a mother. Now I am. I have sons that are 27 and 26. I was my grandpapa's baby, and now my grandfather's no longer living. I was a scholarship student. No one really cares about that anymore. Who I was at that particular juncture, if guiding what I care about changes. So I elevate that, as Mary did, as a guidepost for what do I care about most? What we care about most oftentimes is based on what we have accessibility to see. We care about the things that are in our neighborhood and our community that we have access to. Oftentimes, I find right now that we're all worried about real big things that we don't have any control over, while there are lots of little things right in front of us that we could have a whole lot of impact. It's engagement week, y'all. What are the things that we have, what do we care about locally that we can connect to? Those things can still be big, audacious problems. But the reality of what I care about most, I determined as a first-generation college student that what I cared about most was making sure that other first-generation college students had access to higher education. And that they, too, had an opportunity to change the trajectory of their lives, of their families' lives, to have conversations about generational wealth. We do a lot of work at the Kansas Leadership Center with institutions of higher ed, and oftentimes when I'm meeting with university presidents or the president of the Alumni Association or the provost, they talk a lot about workforce development. And I'm guessing that you here at K-State, you all talk about workforce development and making sure that your students are getting the types of degrees where they have high employability for high wage earning jobs. Can you tell I was an assistant provost? I know the language. One of the universities we're working with now, behind closed doors, the university president said, yeah, when I'm at the Chamber of Commerce, we talk about workforce development, but what we're really doing is we're trying to create generational wealth for kids who haven't had access to post-secondary. That was hot. That sentence right there told me a lot about who she is and what she cares about. It also indicated to me what type of contribution she wants to make in the world. So when I got to thinking, I want to make sure I didn't miss this. When I think about what I care about, and this is for our students. I know there are a lot of students that are in the room. You're getting some extra credit for coming, or maybe this is your class was canceled, so you get credit for coming here. I'm going to give you something you can go back and tell your teacher you learned to think about. And you can tell her that Dr. Mary Toller taught you this, because I stole all this. We're in higher ed. I want to give credit where credit is due. This notion of what do I care about. Sometimes, I was talking to my 26-year-old the other night who is a kind of a burn-it-down kind of kid. I've got one kid, Palatable Peyton. Peyton, literally the oldest kid. Any of you older have multiple children, and you know the oldest who goes to Boy State and does all the things? IB student, never causes you any problems, just Palatable Peyton, right? And what I've learned is that if God gives you a Palatable Peyton, watch out. Watch out, because he's not going to give you two. He's not going to give you two. The next one's going to be Complicated Cameron. Cameron is a burn-it-down type of guy, and Cameron and I were talking a little bit about his path, what it is that he wants to be when he grows up. And I want a job, and he's got a job, but I want a bigger job. And so we're having conversations about what you want that job to be. So I asked him, well, what kind of problem do you want to solve? What contribution do you want to make? He says, I don't know, Mom. That's just really too philosophical. Peyton is a computer scientist, and he's making a whole lot of money. He can buy a house next year. What kind of job can I get like that? Well, we've made choices, and those choices leave us here. So I asked him, I said, reflect on your emotions and your passions. What do you care about? What do you think about? What shows up on your social media feeds? That tells you a little bit about what issues you care about most. You may not know implicitly or explicitly that those are things that you care about. But if hunger keeps showing up, you might care about hunger. I watched a video of a young woman who was sharing her experience with kind of trying to figure out her passions. Ended up, it was fashion. And then she tried to figure out, well, how do I monetize fashion? Now, it's in engagement and extension week, so my invitation is not to go out and become fashionistas. Although, as you could tell, I think you ought to be cute while you're saving the world. I think it's an absolute mandatory piece. But this idea of what am I passionate about? What are my habits? What am I already doing? What types of things have I done forever? I grew up in 4-H, or I grew up in Girl Scouts, or I like to volunteer, or, I've always wanted to be a nurse. I used to dream about being a nurse. Who did you think you were going to be when you were 4, or 5, or 8? I wanted to be a bus driver. That didn't work out so well for me. But for some of you, you had greater visions of where you were going to contribute. Go back to that to figure out who I am, what do I care about, and connect those with what is it going to take, what type of contributions you need to make in the world. This idea of strengths and talents. One of the things that was so welcoming for me to come and participate in UFM's work is this notion that anyone can teach and anyone can learn. That aligns very closely with the Kansas leadership philosophies that anyone can lead and anyone should be able to be led. There's some parallels in that. This idea of strengths and talents. I don't know what you thought you were going to be good at. Any of you know when you were like in first grade or second grade, things that you did often that your parents would tell stories about now? That you could say out loud? Yeah, none of you are willing to tell. I'll tell. I have always been a writer, and unbeknownst to me, I've always been a person who could do this. Now, I am an introvert at my core, so I will go back to the Holiday Inn tonight and crawl up in a ball until tomorrow morning when I drive home in the solace of my car with no stimulus of any sort. But I distinctly recall being in the 3rd grade. I'm the oldest of 26 grandchildren. 26 grandchildren. We were a gang before gangs were a thing. And 22 of us lived within a 4-block radius of one another, right? Right. I'm telling you, don't mess with my cousins, because we coming. Gang, gang. Don't mess with my cousins. I recall, my aunt tells a better story than I do. There was a family that lived down the street from my grandmother, the Fields family. And the Fields family had 4 young men who lived in it. And they were beautiful. Like Adonis beautiful. And I wrote Kenny Fields a love letter in the 3rd grade. And I told him all the things that I thought our life was going to manifest together, if only he would choose me. Now, I was in the 3rd grade, and Kenny Fields was in high school. That didn't matter. He just needed to wait. My grandmother found the note and gave it to my aunt. I know, right? It'd be your own people. It'd be your own people. My grandmother gave my aunt the note, and my grandmother, and I didn't sign it, but I did profess my undying love and affection, and I named our children, the whole 9. I did it all. And my aunt came to me and said, well, I won't tell you exactly what she said, because those words will hurt you sometimes. But I was accused of being the type of woman who wore red fingernail polish at our house back then. Scandal. And she said to me, I know you wrote it. You're the only one who can use words with more than 5 letters. That was forecasting that I would be in a position where I would write and I would share and I would correspond and communicate ideas. I was doing it in the 3rd grade. The likelihood that the thing that you can do to help your community is something that you've been doing since the 3rd grade. It doesn't require you to learn a new skill. Use one that you've been mastering all your life. Identify your strengths and talents. When you're trying to figure out what kind of contribution, ask for insight. My aunt tells that story, and she's like, girl, I always knew you were going to be a talker. Sure you did, Auntie. Sure you did. I believe her, kind of, sort of. And then ultimately, even if you're unsure, do something. At the Kansas Leadership Center, we believe in experimentation, that we don't have to wait for the perfect answer. We need a good enough response to give us enough courage, curiosity, and compassion to engage in some work. The last question that Mary's faculty member asked her to contemplate is, what is it going to take to get there? You've determined who you are. It's Extension and Engagement Week. You've determined a little bit more about what you care about, or the area or the issue or the challenge that's right before you that you want to make progress on. Perhaps you've thought a little bit more about what type of contribution you want to make in the world connected to that challenge. And then the idea of what is it going to take to get there? How provocative to ask yourself that multiple times a year. Who am I right now? What do I care about most? What type of contribution do I want to make to that thing? And what is it going to take to get there? Now, I think, as I would imagine Dr. Douglas would, one of the answers to that is leadership. I believe that what it's going to take to get there is leadership. Curious, compassionate, courageous leadership. And if you're familiar with KLC, there are some underlying tenets to what I mean when I say leadership. And I'll run through those for those of you that may be less aware, but I know that several of you are probably pretty connected to our curriculum. The first and foremost underlying principle of leadership, if you were to look at a definition as a what, when, where, how, why, the what leadership is an activity, not a position. It's an activity, it's not a position. If I were to ask how many of you remember the first time you were called a leader, most of you would say something like on a youth sports team, on a 4-H team doing some competition, in middle school, elementary school. Any of you that fits for you? You were young when someone called you a leader. I've always been exceptional. I was called a leader when I was in kindergarten. I was a line leader. Any of you ever get to be the line leader? It's a real label, right? The line leader, for those of you who did not have an opportunity to be, line leaders, that's saying something right there. Complicated Cameron probably wasn't ever a line leader. Peyton was a line leader every week, I'm sure. Line leader had a very specific job. Those of you that were line leaders, you may recall. You are to get in front of the line, put your hands down to your side, walk to the bathroom, stop at the tape in the floor, wait for your teacher to catch up with you. When the teacher comes with you, you release the group in groups of 3. Go in, do your business, wash your hands, come out, line up on the opposite wall. Guess what you do? Stop at the tape. When the teacher says we're all done, your job is to lead the line back to the classroom. I am 54, and I still remember how to be the line leader. Being a line leader in kindergarten taught me that leadership was not about the position, it was about the work that you do there. I learned in kindergarten that you have to do something to be in the exercise of leadership. I can't be the line leader and just stand there. Line leader requires work. I'm not sure what happens between kindergarten and, say, our first or second job, where we then get to the point that we allow other folks to say, oh, well, they're the leader, they're going to solve the problem. When really they're not the leader, they're just the person with the most authority. Now, I'm not inviting you to raise your hand, but each one of us knows some people with really big titles who you would not follow across the street. So we inherently know that leadership and authority are not the same thing. But for some reason, we allow ourselves to release what it is that we inherently know and buy into that leadership is about authority. Leadership isn't about authority. Leadership is an activity, not a position. Tim talked about this notion of leadership happens. Anyone can do it anytime, anywhere. If we believe that it's an activity or an exercise, then anybody can do it. Of all of the underlying principles at KLC, the one that gives me angst is the one that says everybody can do it. I believe that everybody can do it, but I've added ... It may not look like leadership. My approach sometimes has to be different as a third-generation Kansan and a first-generation college graduate than some of my peers. If you've been married or spoused up or have a partner, sometimes you understand you can't just go ask for new windows. You have to make a point of figuring out how to convince your partner that new windows are necessary. Some of you will get that later. You've been tricked. Leadership can happen anytime, anywhere, ... It may not always look like what we think of as leadership. Leadership oftentimes has risk associated with it. I like to tell folks that I work with, if your stomach doesn't hurt a little bit, you've not exercised leadership at all. You've managed some things pretty well. You might have supervised some things. You might have coordinated some things. But if you didn't have to pause and think, how will this impact X if I do Y? It probably wasn't a leadership move. Leadership is reserved for our toughest challenges. Things that our grandfathers and grandmothers and foremothers and forefathers, they fought those very same battles. So I noticed when I went through the list of the 5 critical areas that you all are focusing on, particularly in K-State Extension, food insecurity and food systems was one of those items. Makes sense, right? It's K-State. If there's not food on there somewhere, then if y'all not doing it, who's doing it? Do you think we're the first people to be worried about people having access to healthy food? Probably not. Are we willing and able to do work in the work of extension to make sure it's fewer people? Absolutely. We know that it's a pervasive, complex issue. I know one of the tests I use, particularly around local issues, if I ever heard my grandma talk about it. So like my grandma stood about this tall. I could put her in my pocket like this, like this. Her name is Ozell Kirkendall. As the oldest of 26 of her grandchildren, we referred to her quietly as the Colonel, never to her face, never. She's just Granny, but we called her the Colonel. My grandmother had a high school diploma, but I never saw my grandma drive, like anywhere, like in a car. Anywhere. In all of her life, I never saw her drive a car, but stop by the house and tell my grandma that so-and-so doesn't have food. She's on a fixed income. And somehow, some way, family got a month's worth of food at the house. Some of you know people in your community like this. Tell my grandmother that so-and-so doesn't have something to wear for the prom. And my grandmother is pulling out all types of scraps of fabric and putting together some sort of dress, and it's got a whole bunch of ruffles on it. Jesus, bless us all. But you got a dress. But you got a dress to wear to prom, right? There are issues happening in our communities that have been long plaguing. That's how we know leadership is required. We can't supervise our way out of this. We can't find enough experts in the universe to show up and help us to make progress on it. We have to get a lot of voices, that notion of democracy. We have to bring a lot of people together around that issue. We got to have a lot of conversations, probably more conversations than any of us are really interested in having, in order to ensure that we have as many points of view as possible in order to move progress, because progress only happens when we're all moving. One of the things that I think we've forgotten in our country, or at least in some pockets of the country, and folks with I talk, we think that just because me and my group are moving, that's progress. In spite of the fact that we've left 51% or 48% or whatever percent of people behind. That is not progress. How many of you know you can't swim as long as you're tethered? If you've left people behind, you can't make forward progress. That means we have to take the time to come together and work together and fight it out in order to be able to really start with making progress. I was asked to talk a little bit about this notion of what it takes to get there. And I don't want to have you to start your engagement and extension week as you're thinking about how the university extends into community from a Pollyanna state of, oh no, we're going to go do great things, because doing great things is really hard. How many of you know that? Great things only happen when great people are willing to do a lot of really not great stuff. And much of it are things that we never get to hear about, we never get to clap about, we never get to celebrate, because it's grunt work. And grunt work most often looks like leadership. So this idea of leadership, 5 tenets. We like to think that, or state, that leadership starts with you and must engage others. And in many cases, the first thing that we have to do is authorize ourselves to exercise leadership. And sometimes that means figuring out who I am. Mary told us who I am, what do I care about, what do I want to contribute, and what is it going to take? That authorization that, you know what, I don't have to wait. In fact, if I wait, things won't get better. How many of you know that no one's coming to save us? Nobody. Nobody's coming to save you. We have to save ourselves. And again, it can't be me. It absolutely has to be we. And that can be really scary. Any of you in the middle of an exercise of leadership where you're really nervous about if I step out, if I say a thing, if I do a thing? No? Okay, maybe I'm just the only one. Okay. I serve on the board of directors of a bank. And it's a family-owned bank, a community bank, right? When I was asked to join the bank, I was taken to breakfast by people in really sharp suits. I could do that. I have lots of sharp suits, not a problem. I can look the part. We get there, we're having breakfast, things are going really well. And I'm flabbergasted they're asking me. I've served on lots of boards, but I can barely balance my own checkbook. I don't know exactly why I'm being asked to serve on the board of a bank. You know what banks do? They keep everybody's checkbooks. So I say to the owner of the bank, the president, CEO, I'd be happy to serve. My first generation, Kaye, showed up. Dr. Monk Morgan escaped, and Kaye was sitting there, in all of her transparency and vulnerability. But I was like, I don't know that I know enough to do this. He said, are you willing to ask a question? I said, well, yeah, all the time. He said, well, you are exactly what we're looking for. Okay. I joined the bank board. Well, I get to the bank board, and much like experiences that I've had in my life and other spaces, I'm the only one like me. Except that looks a little bit different. I'm the only one that's a first-generation college graduate. I'm the only one with a doctorate degree. So I feel like, okay, score on that one, I got something. I'm the only woman, and I'm the only person of color. Been on this bank board for 4 years. Love the experience. But I am still the only one like me. And oftentimes, we're sitting in meetings having conversations. We had a conversation recently about taking down a branch and moving it 4 blocks down the street. Now, Manhattan blocks may not be the same as Wichita blocks. But if you take the block and you make it the long way, not the short way, 4 blocks can be a considerable amount of space to cover if you're walking to the bank. And so I got a little bit of courage, found some curiosity, and asked the group to have some compassion. I was like, well, what happens when you move that bank for the people? There's not another bank in a 6-mile radius. What was the math that we did to say that we should move that? And the hush fell over the room. And one of my peers says, well, what do you mean, how will people get to the bank? They'll drive. And I said, oh, beloved. You know what that means, right? Why would you assume that everyone has a car? He said, yeah, I didn't mean that. Oh, no, you did. You did. So let's unpack that. We're moving the bank, the branch, down the street. Before I can vote yes, now, no, I'm only 1 vote, so I'm not going to keep it from happening. I think it's probably a really good business move. But we should at least know how many people in the community are being disenfranchised. We say that we're a bank that wants to build a community-based bank. We want to, sponsor small businesses that are women, military, and veteran, and minority-owned. We want to ensure that kids in these neighborhoods have access to college, but we don't want them to have a bank. That feels incongruent to me. I like math. It's like that math doesn't math. I wasn't thinking about being courageous or exercising leadership, but that's what it looks like. It looks like raising your hand in a room where sometimes you're going to say a thing that exposes your vulnerability. That I grew up poor, where my mama walked to the bank. So I know what it's like. When I opened a bank account, I asked my mom to take me, and she was like, I can't go with you. It's just 6 blocks, you go walk. I literally remember the day I walked to the bank by myself and opened a bank account. But because I know that, my influence on that board bank has to look different. I'm going to elevate something different than my colleagues were. That's leadership. What do you care about? Who you are influences how you authorize yourself to lead. We have to sometimes learn new things, and I'm going to submit that sometimes we also have to unlearn some things. There are things that prevent us from exercising leadership. Stories that other people tell about us and stories that we tell about ourselves. What is it that we have to unpack that allows us to authorize ourselves? We have to start with the leadership challenge. I don't know about you, but there have been times when I've allowed myself to get caught up in a problem based on the person. I would do this, except that office over there, they just are so hard to work with. I would do this, but the director over there, he's difficult. I could make progress on this if so-and-so would just go along to get along. I would be a better parent if complicated Cameron was more like Peyton. When we center the person, we set ourselves up to fail when it's an adaptive or a complex issue. Because we don't separate ourselves and the human component from the problem itself. It causes us to misdiagnose, and when we don't diagnose the problem correctly, none of the solutions can be correct. All of our experiments will be off by just a little bit. So this idea of moving from a person-centric model of leadership, where the leadership really is a position, where there's an authority that tells us what to do, and then we do it, and the followers simply wait for direction, is not how we make progress. We make progress when we see that this is an activity and anybody can do it, ... It may look different, may not look like leadership. And everyone can see and seize their moments to change the trajectory of a conversation or can engage on an issue that's close to them. We might not be able to impact what's happening with SNAP, but we can impact what's happening at the local food shelter. We may not be able to impact what's happening at the Department of Education, but we can volunteer at a school in our community in a reading program. We can donate books for kids to be able to read. We can work on literacy skills. There are things that we can do around big adaptive issues that it doesn't require us to have a lot of authority. And for those of you that are embedded in 105 different counties in our state, you have a lot of access, a front row seat to what's happening. If everyone focuses on the same leadership challenge, that's how we make progress. We don't have to do it the same way, but we have to be going in the same direction. Our methodology can be different, but our path has to be similar. So unraveling the individuals, I don't care who's in office. I want kids to be able to go to college. So what are the things that I can do to make sure that kids can go to college? I can read scholarship applications. I can take $25, $30 a month now that Peyton and Cameron are done with school and put in a little scholarship fund, right? I can help young people write scholarship applications. There are things that I can do. If that's what we can do at an individual level, imagine what you can do with the system in which you are baked. When trying to make progress on tough challenges, we invite people to start where you have influence. Some of you have a lot of authority in systems, have a lot of power. And with power comes influence. And some of you might think you have less of that. I've seen students turn a university upside down. So I'm talking to the enrolled folks at this point. There is a lot of authority in the fact that you are a tuition-paying member of this community. How you use it is important. For good, not for bad. Don't make me come back up here and get y'all. This idea of starting where you have influence. You have influence at the level of self. How am I showing up to these challenges? Some of you have influence within a larger team. Some of you have influence at the community level. And some of you on an even broader stage. If you have a broader stage, you don't have to start at the self level. But if you don't, the act of authorizing yourself to lead means I'm going to start where I can. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be in action. This idea of being able to start where we have influence. Leadership starts with you. It must engage others. Most problems in our community, we are both a part of the solution and a part of the problem. That's usually the hardest part of any issue that we're trying to work on. We are part of both the issue, the problem, and the solution. And oftentimes, I don't know about you, I'm human, so I'm just going to name, usually it's the other people that are causing the problem. It's usually not me. And I'm usually capable of explaining how they did all the things wrong. Rarely am I ever able to start with, I could have done these 3 things differently. And had I have done these things differently, maybe, just maybe, we would have had a different outcome. Leadership means I got to check self first. I got to figure out what I did, what I didn't do, how I behaved, how I engaged, what I didn't do, who I partnered with, who I didn't partner with, who I asked, who I didn't ask. What are the common mistakes that I typically make, because Kaye just I'm Kaye. And the same mistakes I make today are the ones that I made probably 10 years ago. I just recognize them quicker. I don't stop making them. Recognizing you're part of the mess, you cannot exercise leadership without being able to center what it is that you're doing to contribute. If you're in an office setting where you're trying to make progress on a thing and it's not moving, check you. Then go talk to your colleagues. And the last piece of this is that you have to engage others. Oh, this was you're part of the mess. I love that. You're in there, y'all. Something that you're doing or not doing contributes to the issue. And this idea of engaging others. We believe that leadership is best done in community, which is why I got excited about coming here to be with you all. Because you all are a community of folks poised to exercise leadership. We believe in a what we call the collaborative premise, where we think that in order to make progress on a tough challenge that's been centered, you have to have the right people. And let me put a pin in that, because oftentimes we think the right people, if you don't know what leadership means, you might allow yourself to slip back into some old ways of thinking, to think the right people are the people with power, or the right people are the people with authority, or the right people are the bosses. The right people are the people who care about the issue. And in most cases around an adaptive issue, it's got to be some people who are proximate to that issue. You can't solve homelessness without talking to the folks who are unhomed. You can't solve or make progress on teen pregnancy without talking to teenagers. And I don't mean talking to teenagers, I mean listening to teenagers. You can't get ahead of smoking or vaping without talking about people who are part of the community that engage in that particular type of behavior. So right people literally means what Dr. Douglas said, the democratization by bringing lots of different people together. I had a college professor Dr. Anna Chandler, she just went to go be with the ancestors last weekend. We celebrated her homegoing celebration. Dr. Chandler said that history is like an accident at a four-way stop. What corner you're standing on dictates what you report to the reporting officer. If I'm standing on the northeast corner, what I tell the officer I saw is true, even if it's different than what the person on the southwest corner reports. Leadership requires us to have a 360 view. And that means we have to ask people who are on the what? Opposite side of an issue. Who don't see the thing the same way that we do. Who have a little more proximity to an issue. It may mean we have to go to some uncomfortable places. The Kansas Leadership Center has, for the last 2 years, been heavily engaged in working on the issue of homelessness. And in order for me to understand what it meant to be homeless, I went and participated in the annual count of the unhomed in our county. Any of you ever do that with the United Way? It is a challenging experience to say that you care about a group of people or a person and not be willing to stand next to them because of the way they smell. I'm a part of the problem. If I can't go sit next to you, if I can't go get the report from you, then maybe my care about the homeless issue is less than I want to say, right? It's really noble for me to say I care about it, but when I get there, I'm like, oh no, I don't want to go talk over there. I'm afraid. Well, there's a police officer standing right next to you and he's got a gun. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm not sure. Okay, you got to work on that real quick. And like real quick, because they're standing right there and they see you not moving, right? You're making the problem worse, not better. So this idea of getting the right people who are proximate, people who agree, people who disagree, people up and down an organizational structure, in some cases, people who don't have anything to do with you. You need to put a person on your bank board that doesn't understand anything about banking because they'll ask you a really right question. We believe that you have to have good information. And you know what? Good information is hard to come by these days. You got to check and double check and triple check your sources to ensure that you have good information. And sometimes, even when you see it with your own eyes, you can't trust it. I saw an AI video today that I was like, I sent it to my husband. Is this real? He's like, no. I was like, I didn't think so. Good information. You gotta know about the issue. You gotta know, you also have to know what you don't know and be willing to sit in the gap of uncertainty. And we believe that you need a healthy process. A process where folks show up with some leadership skill, where people are willing to ask some questions, where there's some safety and psychological safety created, but not so much safety that people aren't willing to tell a truth. The collaborative premise is what you all are working on in your 105 counties. This idea of impact, leadership leads to impact. Leadership leads to impact. Impact first starts with self. We have 4 different competencies in our framework, and the one that I live in is manage self. If I could get Kaye Morgan together, the world would be a much better place. I work on it daily. Sometimes I get close to great, other times we just all need to be in prayer and supplication. This idea of I'm going to work on self, or I can, once I master me, right? I go through Mary's questions, I master me, then perhaps I'm prepared to look for impact within my team. And my team could be defined as a closed system. That might be your office. That might be the 5 people on the team in which you work. It may be your Sunday school group. It may be the church group in which you are a part of. It might be the Kiwanis. However you define, but it's a closed system. At Self, we're looking for behavior change, my personal behavior change. Dr. Shams has taught me about this. I'm looking for my personal behavior change. Once I get myself together, then I can start looking at whether my closed system is operating any differently because I'm operating differently. Some of us have enough authority in spaces that if we start using a word, people will start using that word, and they'll start doing the thing that we're doing. And we're like, okay, look here. What's happening here? We're all doing a thing. We can work on our closed system. If we've gotten some manifestation of good or making progress on a closed system, maybe, just maybe, we're ready to make progress on a big community issue. Like any number of the issues that you all have named, the 5 critical areas in Extension, K-State Extension. And then ultimately, what we're doing in our state is probably more aspirational. If you're looking at a logic model, it's the column way over in the end, that if everything works well exactly the way we want it to, that's what's going to happen. Impact happens at several different levels. But you can't have impact externally if you've not figured out your own behavior piece. The exercise of leadership is an individual exercise done in community. You have to be right before you can bring others along with you. This idea of where I have influence. I don't know if you noted, but this is the same graphic. Where I have influence is where that impact can be felt. If you're not a part of it, it's hard for that impact to come to being. That's what our work looks like. The Kansas Leadership Center is proud to stand in relationship and in partnership with K-State University, with K-State Extension, and with UFM. We believe, like they do, that people can learn and teach one another in lots of different milieus and lots of different ways, both informal and informal. The 2 things here, one is a survey that you can share back with the team at KLC on whether or not I did a good job. The other is if you're interested in learning more about any of the concepts that we talked about tonight, there's a 50% off opportunity to come to do a little more training. I thank you all for the opportunity to be here tonight. I've been asked to do to open it up for Q&A. If you got any questions on your heart or things that students in particular, if your notes are unclear and you need to clarify something, this is a really good time so that you get an A and all the possible points on your assignment. But if there are things that either resonated with you or didn't resonate with you or things that you want to dig deeper on, I'll pause and leave some space for folks to ask questions. Or share your own experience. Yes?
Okay, great. How do we deal with the fact, I wrote this down because it hit me, that what we can do in our spaces right now is being dictated in rooms that we have no voices in, i.e. teaching.
Yeah. I just had breakfast with my former provost last week, and I asked her the same question. They're having some conversations about AI. I'm guessing lots of you all that are faculty are having conversations about what can be taught, how it can be taught, what resources you can use. I think this is a really interesting time, and I'd love to say that I have a perfect answer. In fact, I don't know that I have one at all, other than I think it's a moment to tell the truth to the degree that it doesn't cost you your job, right? So I'm not ever getting ready to ask, leadership does not equal martyrdom. But it does look like saying, hey, there are some resources that are available to you. I don't have access to them, but if you went to the library, you'd be able to find these things. Tell me a little bit more about what you're curious about. I might be able to asking questions. Tell me more about what you're curious about. Okay, if that's what you're curious about, where have you looked? Well, here's some resources that I heard about. I don't know if those are things. You don't have to teach it. Right? So I think that there are ways, but I would imagine that it's completely exhausting to have to even think of ways to get real creative around how it is that you educate folks to have open minds and open hearts about this work, right? Because we're looking for curiosity, courage, and compassion. And when the system has kind of clamped down on some of that, that feels really hard. So I think my best answer is, I don't know. Anybody else got a better answer in the UFM spirit of learning and teaching? Yes, Dr. Scott.
Not a better answer.
An answer.
I want to pull on that thread a little further. When is it worth losing your job?
Ooh. You know, who am I? What do I care about? What contribution am I trying to make? And what is it going to take to get there? Now, I come from a history. I told you I'm only a third generation Kansan. My people have not always been free. My grandfather's parents were enslaved. So my threshold for rebel rousing is quite a bit higher than most, because I come from a people who had to rise above and shake up stuff. I get told all the time, you should be more quiet. Well, if my grandma had been more quiet, I wouldn't be here. If my grandpa had been more quiet, I wouldn't be here. There are things that I'm willing to push. I work for a very nonpartisan organization. I worked for 20 years. I told you what I care about is students getting access to post-secondary. And the program and the community that I love more than probably any other is housed in the Department of Education. And their grants are being removed, and kids are no longer having access. And I went to my board and said, you know, I know what my job is, but I know what my legacy is. And my legacy says the 584 students that I served as a TRIO Upper Bound director allows me the privilege and the responsibility to stand in this moment. What I can't do is be quiet. Now, I won't be disrespectful, but do know I'm going to say something about this. And if indeed we're going to have a problem about that, let's talk about that now. And the response was, if it were any other thing, we might have something to say about it. But on this, it's clear that you're unmovable. So I did it, and I continue to do it on that thing. Who I am, what I care about, how I want to show up in the world, and what is it going to take. Mary told us all. That's how we decide. At what point are you willing to walk away? And that's a very individual decision. What you're willing to risk. Yeah, great question. Yes, there's a question here. She's right behind you.
Hi, thank you, Kaye, for being here. That was great. And I'm glad they mentioned that, because October is also Wellness Month here at K-State, this week's engagement and extension. So speaking of wellness, yes, we realize exercising leadership is exhausting, it is tiring, it is stressful. So if we have a value, if we have something we really care about, and we've done all these things, we've checked ourselves, we've invited the people who matter, we've talked to and listened to others. Let's say we've done a great job and followed your class and did everything you said, and we still feel like, am I wrong? Like, am I screwing up? Am I seeing this wrong? Is my value bad?
Yeah.
Or what am I doing wrong? Or you just feel like, man, I'm not changing anything. I'm not succeeding in anything. Am I feeling like, what am I doing wrong? And you're at that point where you have this value, you want to make a change in the world, and it just seems like you're not succeeding even one step forward.
I think that's a real lived experience, and something that a lot of us deal with. I think what I'm reminded, again, everything I learned from Upper Bound kids. I had a student that told me one time, he was like, Miss Morgan, you playing checkers, everybody else is playing chess. They had cell phones, and we had a no cell phone policy. And I kept taking the cell phones, and they kept ending up with cell phones. And I'm like, I don't understand how they're proliferating. What is happening overnight? Where they were like, you're playing chess, or you're playing checkers, we're playing chess. So one of the things that I've had to learn in my own haste and desire to make progress, being 54 helps, right? Because now I've lived enough life to see that just because I don't make a change, it doesn't mean it won't change. What it means is we got to play the long game. And sometimes the role that you have to play moves it a little, but not enough for you to see seismic shift. I also come from a family of great faith, where my grandma and mom would always give me a Bible story. There's a Bible story for everything, y'all. There's a Bible story. You know, Moses didn't make it to the promised land. He got them right up too. So there are things that we will work on in our lifetime that we will never see the manifestation of how that shows up in the lives of the folks who are coming behind us. We just got to believe that the effort is worth it. Martin Luther King never saw me vote, but I do. But I do. I'm checking just to make sure that all minds are clear. Here we go. Yes.
If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, undergraduate, like 20-ish,
Yeah.
what would you kind of give yourself?
Girl, breathe. Just breathe. It will be okay. It will be hard, and it will not look like you think it's going to be. You will not marry Kenny Fields. You will not marry Lamont Blanford. It will be okay, right? I think I was a high-achieving, you know, poverty will make you do some things, right? It'll either build you or it will break you. And I'm really fortunate that while I was impoverished financially, I had lots of other supports. I had a praying mom, I had a grandma and a dad who were, to the degree they could be, present. I had 25 cousins. I had a lot of things around me, but what I knew for sure was that I did not want to be poor. I didn't need to be rich, but I didn't want to have to put my milk outside in the snow because we didn't have electricity, right? So when I say poor, I don't mean I didn't have Guess jeans. I mean we were poor. I knew I didn't want to be poor. I didn't have strategy. I just had a lot of work ethic. And I'm not one of those folks that say, work hard and life will, because lots of people work hard and they don't make progress. So I'm not willing to say that. I feel like I've been very fortunate in that my work has aligned with my gifts. And if I can find a way to align my gifts with what the work is, I'm going to figure out a way to win. And so I think I figured that, I didn't figure that out until I was like 40. I mean, I'm just telling the truth. I look smart, but it took me a long time to figure it out. I think that notion of identifying what your talents and your strengths are and breathing, that what I thought I knew for sure at 21 in most cases was completely erroneous. And so sit down somewhere and listen to some people. I think there's a really interesting thing that's happening, particularly for those of you that have multi-generational offices, where there's Gen X and Gen Y and Gen Z and all the people with the Gen on top of the name are showing up in the workforce. And there's a group of people with power who don't want to give it up. And there's a group of people who are scrapping because they think if I have it, then I'll be able to change the universe. I think for me, I was that person where I had, in some cases, maybe even a little bit of disrespect. Hard to believe, right? But disrespect for some of my elders because I went to college, right? And you didn't. So I know a lot of things that you didn't. It took me a little bit to learn. That degree is helpful. And it is education, but it is not necessarily wisdom. And so I would tell myself, sit down, breathe, take a seat, listen to some people who know the things that you don't know, and then be in alignment with what your gifts are. Quit fighting so hard to try to do things that's not your calling, that's not where you've been gifted to do. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you tonight.